Hello again, everybody. I'm Billy Derrick along with Joey Dwyer, and it's time for our last-minute thoughts, even though we still got about 2 hours away from kickoff here, maybe a little less than 2 hours. We are live here at FirstBank Stadium, Vanderbilt and Alabama A&M. FCS team HBCU coming in here to Nashville. Kickoff is set for 6 o'clock. And Joey, it's a little bit cooler today, right? We're used to our surroundings, and we're playing with more confidence here in week one.
Billy, we got the balls to go on the field, finally. It took us a week, but we're on the field, and should be an interesting week one for Vanderbilt. I guess not week 0, not week 2, it's week 1, but should be an interesting outing for Vanderbilt against a team that doesn't seem to have the expectation that it'll win. Vanderbilt's a 36-point favorite, but obviously can't overlook teams, especially teams like this that'll throw some exotic looks at you. A team with some playmakers and a team that will give Vanderbilt challenges in a few aspects. Clarkley's team has to be prepared, it has to be focused, and it has to be sharp. I think that was the themes this week, is just with everything that they're going to throw at you, you have to be ready for everything and you have to maintain that focus. Although they're an FCS team, although they went 4-7 last year, they're a team that can come in here and compete. They have athletes, and they have some high major transfers on the roster. So a team to watch, but a team that Vanderbilt should beat by a good amount.
I hate to put this evil on Vanderbilt fans, but I just got word that there was a lightning strike 2 minutes ago. I don't know how that's even possible, but I hope that wasn't true, but we'll see. So hopefully we're able to avoid the lightning strikes. But Joey, let's get into Vanderbilt's response this week, right? Last week against Hawaii, Vanderbilt hung on. They were fortunate to beat the Rainbow Warriors 35-28. You saw last night Hawaii ended up losing to Stanford by 2 scores. So maybe we learned a lot about Vanderbilt, maybe we didn't. You know, week 1 to week 2 or week 0 to week 1 is usually the most improvement you see in a team, right? We hear about that all the time. I'm looking for the offensive line to be the most improved group, be able to dominate in the trenches and get this run game going, because if you can run the ball well against Alabama A&M, that'll set up everything else, and Vanderbilt should be able to dominate this team on the ground. And if they can't, Joey, they've got serious problems, as we've talked about.
Right, maybe where the most drop-off comes with an FCS team versus a FBS team is just the bodies on the front line. Obviously, there's playmakers at every level, but it feels like Vanderbilt could really dominate the trenches this week. It felt like they could last week. Didn't quite do that, but now it feels like this is really essential that Vanderbilt can dominate the trenches this week and make an impact there. I'll go to the defensive line as well. Going to be without Darren Agu again, but we'll have some playmakers still. Clarkley has said in the past, I think this is one of his deepest defensive lines, if not his deepest defensive line. We got to see some evidence of that. We saw some guys make plays last week. On the final interception by Derrick Wright, the pass rush was there, but throughout most of Saturday night last week, it wasn't. And maybe that's due to Vanderbilt having the rain delays and being out of sync week 1 or week 0 in its first game. We got to see that evidence though, and this week is really when it has to come. Some of that pressure has to be taken off of Vanderbilt's corners, which have struggled but can't do it all on their own. It has to be the defensive line getting to the quarterback and making plays, pressuring, doing all the things that make it easier on the second and third levels. And it'll be really interesting to see if Vanderbilt can not only dominate on the offensive line, but also the defensive line. They're going to throw a lot of different looks at Vanderbilt's offensive line, and it has to be able to handle that.
You mentioned the defensive line, Joey. They have to improve as well, because that'll help out the corners, right? The corners struggled last week. You got young guys out there, Martel Heights, Trudell Berry. We're expecting to see him tonight. Again, we're still unclear about why we didn't see him last week, but Trudell Berry is expected to play tonight. For Martel Heights and Tyson Russell, though, I'm looking for those 2 guys to improve as well, right? I mean, they let's face it, they struggled last week against Hawaii. Alabama A&M is not Hawaii, right? They're an FCS team. They run a nice up-tempo offense, so that'll be, it'll be another challenge for these corners and another opportunity to learn. So Vanderbilt has to show their fans and their coaching staff that they can pass defend against an FCS team well enough to prepare them for that Wake Forest game, right? This is, for me, Joey, this game tonight is all about preparing for Wake Forest next week, right? Because if you don't look good tonight, you're not giving your fan base and your coaches much confidence for next week, right? So I think I'm intrigued to see the cornerback play. Does Russell improve? Does Height improve? How do they split the snaps there? Because they was split halfway 50-50 last week. So I'm interested to see how they split those. Is it the same thing as last week? And how they perform. Because there's a lot of pressure on those corners, and every team Vanderbilt plays offensively knows that Vanderbilt struggles in the cornerback spot. So I'm looking for Russell and Martel Heights to improve this week.
Right, I think it's also worth mentioning Martel Heights' health Thursday, didn't finish practice. Clarkley called him questionable. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of how he comes along and how much he plays, if he plays. Clarkley said that Trudell Berry and a few other corners would be guys that would be worth watching if Martel Heights can't play. But obviously you want Martel Heights on the field for a game like this, especially this early in his career before you see a team like Wake Forest next week. And I think you're right. Wake Forest is the team circled on Vanderbilt's schedule at this point in the year. Obviously you don't want to overlook a team like this, but Wake Forest is a team to watch and a team that will be crucial to whether Vanderbilt can make a bowl game, is whether it comes out of Winston-Salem with a win next week. And obviously there's outliers, but generally if you can't perform against these two teams, you don't have much confidence that you can go into Winston-Salem for an early road game against an ACC team and win. So Vanderbilt will really have to put it on Alabama A&M to give me any semblance of confidence they can go in Winston-Salem next week and win. I think there is outliers, though. You saw last year basketball team lost by 57 to Alabama and then beat Ole Miss on Saturday, beat Tennessee the next game. So there's outliers, but generally you want to feel good coming out into these two games, and it feels like a bounce-back opportunity for Vanderbilt today against an FCS team that has struggled in the past.
Yeah, this is a get-right game, Joey. We talk about that all the time in football. It's a get-right game. Get yourself right for next week. Let's go to the offensive side of the ball. A.J. Swan, the receivers, Will Shepard, Quincy Skinner, are both, I think they're coming off some nagging injuries. I'm not saying they're not going to play tonight, but we may not see as much of Shepard and Skinner as we did last week, so they can rest and prepare for next weekend. But I want to talk about the running backs. I mentioned the offensive line at the very beginning. I think the running backs have to improve as well, right? Patrick Smith had that early touchdown, but Vanderbilt only ran for 40 yards on the ground, and that's not going to cut it against a Division I opponent. It'll cut it tonight, right? I mean, I'm sure they could run for 40 yards and still beat Alabama A&M, but I'm looking for Vanderbilt to get across the 100-yard hurdle tonight, right? Get past 100 yards rushing. I think that gives your fan base some confidence, coaches confidence, the team confidence. Patrick Smith. I'm also intrigued to see Cedric Alexander. Does he play a little bit more? Chase Gillespie, he had a physical run after the catch last week. Also A.J. Newberry, right? Do we see the first sighting for him? You would guess you would, right? Vanderbilt gets up big in this game. You see Newberry. I'm also interested to see Diego Benson as well. So the young running backs, how much playing time do they get tonight? But can Vanderbilt improve after last week? Because like I said, Joey, 40 yards on the ground is not going to cut it against many SEC teams. Probably not any.
Right, I think how much we see Cedric Alexander, A.J. Newberry, and Diego Benson really depends on how Vanderbilt comes out of the first half. If Vanderbilt's up 20 after the first half, if you see A.J. Newberry, Diego Benson, and Cedric Alexander getting a lot of reps, it's a good thing. It means Vanderbilt's winning by a lot, and that's the expectation today for this program, that it's able to take a step and live up to the 36-point favorite title. What I'd like to see from Vanderbilt's running backs is just them making plays in space. Gillespie made a play in space out of the backfield on a catch last week. I think two of them, actually. Patrick Smith made a play in space on the touchdown run. Thought it was going to be a nice night for him when he got in that much space and made a play. Really wasn't, though. Vanderbilt's line obviously had some things go wrong, but its running backs really couldn't make as many plays in space as you would have thought and couldn't find the hole like maybe you thought they could. So it'll be an interesting night to see not only the push the offensive line gets, but what the running backs can do in space and what they can do when they're given the opportunity to kind of be in a place where they could make a play and extend a play. Vanderbilt's going to need that, especially if its offensive line struggles like it did last week. The only way that's fixable for the running backs is to make plays themselves, and has to happen tonight, has to happen the rest of the season as well.
We're about an hour and a half away from kickoff here in Nashville at FirstBank Stadium. It's Alabama A&M and Vanderbilt. Joey, final thoughts as we get set for this kickoff.
Alabama A&M's expectation going into this game is to get out of here healthy and compete. That can't be the expectation for Vanderbilt, and I think that expectation that Alabama A&M says a lot about where Vanderbilt is in relation to them and how Vanderbilt can go out and win this game. I wouldn't say Alabama A&M's happy to be here, but Vanderbilt has to be the opposite. Vanderbilt has to come out here, play for 60 minutes. Energy can't wane like it did last week. The execution can't wane. I think the biggest challenge Vanderbilt will see today is just that up-tempo offense and kind of the weird looks Alabama A&M will throw at it. Has to come out of here with a convincing win, not just a win like last week. Has to win by a lot this week for you to feel good about where this program is. 2-0 is 2-0, though, and I think people may lose sight of that if today doesn't go quite the way you want it to. Got to get 6 wins. Vanderbilt having 2 coming out of today will be a step forward as compared to where Clarkley's program was a few years ago, but it can't be the expectation.
Yeah, Alabama A&M head coach Connell Maynor said a few days ago that our plan here is to be as competitive as long as we can and get out of here healthy. So that's a sign that Vanderbilt needs to dominate. Domination and physicality. Those are two words that I expect to see tonight for Vanderbilt. And that'll do it. For Joey Dwyer, I'm Billy Derrick. Thanks for tuning in for another week's edition of Last Minute Thoughts. We'll see you at kickoff. Thanks for joining.